The dragon is a creature that can be tamed and trained so that one can ride upon its back, but on the underside of his throat, it has inverted scales 1 foot in diameter, and if any person brushes against them, the dragon will surely kill them. A ruler of man also has his inverted scales, so if a persuader hopes to succeed, he must be careful to avoid brushing up against them. Legalism is one of the predominant classical Chinese philosophies and one of the most influential schools that dominated Chinese politics and history throughout its long period of history. In today's lecture, we will be learning the background of Han Feizi, who is one of the most prolific philosophers in ancient China, as well as his impact on China and its modern society. We will also briefly explore some of his core ideas and how his response was different from other schools of philosophy. To understand the philosophy of Han Feizi, just like how we would choose to learn about the historical context in ancient Greek to study the pre-Socratic philosophers, we must first examine his background. Han Feizi was the only nobleman out of all the other previous philosophers that I've covered in this channel. He stuttered a lot in a time when eloquence and charm were much needed to seduce the population and the officials. Distressed by the way the state of Han was going, Han Feizi wrote letters to either King An or King Huanghui to persuade him of taking certain actions, but to no avail. Hence, he wrote his ideas down and became famous, particularly in the state of Qin, which would eventually become the first emperor of China. When the kingdom of Qin invaded the kingdom of Han, Han Feizi was sent as an envoy by the king of Han to Qin Shi Huang, who was the king of Qin at the time, for diplomacy. He was welcomed warmly by Qin, but Li Zi, the former classmate of Han Feizi and a minister at the palace, was jealous of his superior erudition. Thus, after witnessing the king's welcome attitude toward Han Feizi, Li Zi feared that Han Feizi might gain the king's favor, so he convinced the king to imprison Han Feizi on the account of duplicity and ordered him to commit suicide by drinking poison before the king could change his mind and release him from prison. Qin Shi Huang, who would become the first emperor of China, was so impressed by Han Feizi's writing that upon seizing the power in 221 BCE, he adopted many of his principles. Even after the Qin dynasty fell, his philosophy was still popular among many Chinese emperors and laid the foundation of the Chinese political structure and helped maintain political stability in Chinese history. Despite his influence on the emperors of many dynasties, his political philosophy is often neglected by scholars because it deals with more pragmatics of rulership than with theoretical philosophical thinking and lack of emphasis on other philosophical matters. He also often gets dissed because of his elitist language, speaking from the ruler's perspective rather than from the people's or third-person point of view. Han Feizi, as a modernist, was not interested in the original natural state of human beings. For him, what is natural is what is human conduct, and he believed that what was ancient had no relevance to the present time. He goes so far as to say that even the ideal sages and rulers cannot inspire people in contemporary society and properly rule the kingdom. Therefore, he developed political strategies for the rulers to be effective, in which the most famous ones among them are the ruler's two handles: punishment and reward. This view is also partially shared by Mao Zi, who also claims that people's motivation stems from these two factors, and they can be manipulated and motivated. Both Mao Zi and Han Feizi believe in the human's ego as its default nature, in which people will always look out for the best interest, regardless of the general welfare of the society. However, whereas Mao Zi tried to alter this nature, Han Feizi did not regard this tendency as evil, but took it as a matter of fact, so he constructed a practical political model to be compatible with it. Han Feizi did not even acknowledge that humans can be rationally self-interested, aligning our self-interest with the greater good, hence did not see the point of education. The only way to completely reform a person is through political reforms. Han Feizi illustrates this point by analogizing that a physician will often suck men's wounds clean and hold the bad blood in his mouth, not because he is bound to them by any tie of kinship, but because he knows there is profit in it. The carriage maker hopes that men will grow rich and eminent. The carpenter fashioning coffins hopes that men will die prematurely. It is not that the carriage maker is kind-hearted and the carpenter a knave. It is only that if men do not become rich and eminent, the carriage will never sell, and if men do not die, there will be no market for coffins. The carpenter has no feeling of hatred toward others, he merely stands to profit by their death. In other words, society is built upon self-interest and profits that may sometimes be aligned. One man's loss may be another man's gain, as one man's trash is another man's treasure. Everyone aims to maximize their interest. And because Han Feizi views society as a zero-sum game, he believes that some people's wish for other people's doom is inevitable. However, unlike Mo Zi, Han Feizi placed the ultimate authority in the hands of the ruler, not in the invisible will of heaven. In other words, in the context of human society, the ruler is heaven. Furthermore, he viewed that one's mindset is affected not only by one's specialty, but also by one's own environment. To support this claim, he draws upon the historical example and states, in the spring following a famine year, even the little boys of the family get no food. In the fall of a year of plenty, even casual visitors are feasted. It is not that men are indifferent to their own flesh and blood, and generous to passing visitors. It is because of the difference in the amount of food to be had. Hence, when men of ancient times made light of material goods, it was not because they were benevolent, but because there was a surplus of goods. And when men quarrel and snatch today, it is not because they are vicious, but because goods have grown scarce. Some people may object to this claim and ask, how about parents' interest to put their children before them? Or what about those who sacrifice themselves for the greater good and for other people's sake? For Han Feizi, he thought that people share moral attributes, both good and bad, such as kindness and callousness, but they simply exist with us and not within us. In other words, these traits are not part of human nature, but simply the product of one's socio-economic environment. Because they are not a part of us, they only exist when the good time comes, but disappear as soon as bad time rolls around. This view of human nature as something that is molded by one's environment rather than something that comes with birth is echoed throughout history's greatest ideas, from Machiavelli to the 20th century in modern-day psychology. Postmodernists also share the same sentiment that a lot of what makes us is simply a matter of social construct, as seen by one's gender and sex. Han Feizi's position can also be witnessed in psychology experiments, in which lab participants go through experiencing rewards and punishment to build some type of habits, or to perform a certain behavior. Pavlov's experiment can be best illustrated to convey Han Feizi's idea. This famous experiment showed how animals' behavior works when they're faced with a certain reward and a certain action. For example, dogs would initially be given treats when a bell rang and they salivated. Later on, they were not given any treats even when the bell rang, but they have learned to associate the act of bell ringing with the food that they developed an automatic response to this act. This experiment illustrates Han Feizi's point that humans can also be influenced by what benefits them and avoid what harms them. We change our behavior depending on the circumstances in our environment. Therefore, for Han Feizi, what the society needs is not encouragement or ideas, but rather concrete rules that we all must go follow, and a king who will act as a trainer of humans in order to condition ourselves to do what is good for society, which would in turn benefits us and avoid what harms the society. Legalism, though influenced by Moism, criticized it for its impractical ideas, such as love and passion, since Han Feizi viewed that the teaching of love is totally ineffectual. What we need to learn is not love, but the severity of law and the harshness of punishment. By knowing the harsh consequences of our actions, it could bring obedience, while love would bring spoilage. As Han Feizi stated, people naturally grow arrogant when loved and become obedient only through coercion. Furthermore, even though Han Feizi was a student of Xunzi, an eminent Confucian philosopher, he criticized the Confucian model of moral politics. He argued that the ruler's virtue and kindness are not sufficient to end the social unrest, but respected absolute power can inhibit violence and secure social order. He concluded that the ruler should devote himself not to love, but to harsh punishment, not to virtue, but to power. Moody highlights this discrepancy as, in Confucianism, the ruler is held subject to absolute moral standards which he may never justly violate, and the legitimacy of his rule depends upon his adherence to those standards. In legalism, the only standard is expediency, and of course, strictly speaking, there is not even any obligation to do the expedient. There is nothing that the ruler may not decree, provided he has the will to make the decree and the will and power to enforce it, and there is nothing the ruler must decree either. Han Feizi's ideal society would be a collective society, and the government should be a totalitarian government, even though the ruler may be a benevolent autocrat, because there is no guarantee that there will be checks and balances for a limited government. They may employ his tactics to oppress the people whenever he wishes to exercise. In this totalitarian society, the individual is not allowed to challenge the existing system or ideology. As we can see here, Feizi's ideal society stands in contrast to a democratic society, and thus the knowledge of the people that is vital to the security of a legalist government must be suppressed, whereas the education in a democratic society must be fostered. Because of the lack of perspectives and lack of diversity in alternative political systems, many later Confucians reject a legalist doctrine. Despite its imminent problem of unchecked government, Feizi believes that a fixed totalitarian society, regulated by public law, is far superior to the political pendulum between enlightened despots and abominable tyrants that is apparent in many nations' histories, as well as its lingering in some present-day nations. He reasons that a unified nation under one supreme power is preferable to constant warfare between different nations, which results in many deaths, starvation, and uncountable justice. Feizi supposed that only legalism in its pure form could end the turmoil and restore peace in a time like the Warring States period. In idealistic philosophies, such as Confucianism, is the root of chaos. We will finish today's lecture with his argument that depicts his utopia, and show humanistic purpose behind Feizi's political philosophy that some may conclude as archaic and ruthless. The enlightened ruler is the one who scrutinizes the facts of right and wrong, and investigates the conditions of order in chaos. Therefore, when governing the state, he rectifies the law clearly and establishes punishment severely in order to rescue all living beings from chaos, rid the whole world of misfortune, prohibit the strong from exploiting the weak, and forbid the majority from violating the minority, enables the old and the infirm to die in peace, and the young and the orphan to grow up, and see to it that the nation's frontiers be not invaded, that the ruler and minister be intimate with each other, that father and son support each other, and that there be no worry about being killed in war or taken prisoner. Such is one of the greatest achievements.